Shalom, shalom, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Pulse of Israel. I am your host, Avi Abelo, here in our eternal and ancestral homeland, the land of Israel. We are going back to politics, back to Israeli politics with our Knesset insider and Yamina consultant and a list on Yamina, Jeremy Saltan. Before we start, again, I just want to remind everybody, please, if you are not yet a subscriber to my videos of the Pulse of Israel, please visit pulseofisrael.com and sign up to ensure that you continue to get our videos. Censorship is growing. You want the truth from me from the land of Israel? Well, you can't rely on Facebook. You can't rely on Twitter. You want to know what you can rely on? Sign up for the newsletter, and then you'll be able to receive my videos each day as we put them out. All right, folks, let's go see what we're about to hear from Jeremy Saltan. Shalom, shalom, Jeremy. It's been a while.
It has. How have you been? It's been a little bit. How have you been, Avi? I haven't spoken to you in a while.
Listen, the 2 weeks of the Gaza war were very, very intense for a number of reasons. I mean, personally, my oldest is in the army, and he was called down south, so he was on the border, ready to be called in any second. So obviously, I'm an Israeli soldier myself, so for me, scary about war for my son, but knowing about the realism about it, obviously I had to be supportive for my wife, it was much harder with her thinking that all of a sudden any second we could have our son inside, and then just on the PR front, working like a dog, not sleeping at all for 2 weeks, trying to be on top of that and let the truth be known to the world was going on. Other than that, so I'm breathing, not surprised about the outcome of the war. Didn't expect anything different. I was surprised that they were talking about a ground invasion. I was pleasantly surprised, even though I told everyone, including my son, that I would be extremely surprised if Bibi gives the green light for a ground invasion, because the only reason nowadays to have a ground invasion is if we're going back in to stay and decimate Hamas and not leave. And I don't think we have the leadership today that would do that. So not surprised we're left with a ceasefire. And then just waiting for the next round. How about you?
I was going to say, could I be cynical for a minute? I know it's tough to do that after a war where, of course, or operation, however you want to talk about that we lost good people. But I sort of felt when I heard a good percentage of our stockpile of the Iron Dome missiles were finished, that it was just a matter of time until we agreed to a ceasefire. I would like to think that was not the reason, and that we really were able to achieve all of the military objectives that we set out to do, and that we really did give Hamas a very, very tough blow. Certainly all of the terrorists that we killed, I'm very, very happy about. I know you are as well. And that's a lot of bad apples that will not be doing things against the Jewish people or the Israeli nation for some time. So definitely I'm happy about that. But I hear what you're saying in terms of the ground operation. Maybe it's possible to make all the objectives just by air. I don't know, because again, as you know, I'm not sitting in the government. I'm not part of the coalition. Not
Impossible.
Part of the
Impossible. Impossible.
But as someone
but on that point, it's very important. But no, before you continue on that point, I mean, even I remember reading the official IDF reports after the very horribly failed 2006 Lebanon war, second Lebanon war. Again, the whole IDF strategy was air offense, thinking they could win the war using the air. And I was in the army since 1993, and in the reserves, my unit is on the northern border. Every reserve duty, we were told, we're training for the next war, which would be in Lebanon, and we would have to go in. And I remember hearing, wait a second, the war is in the air only? They're not strategically using ground forces to win this war? So it was known that it was going to fail, and the official outcome of the reports was like, yeah, we can't win a war by air anymore. That was from then. So I don't even think IDF think anymore they can win an air war.
I mean, I would also point out in the last days of the Lebanese war, when we did have ground forces go in, that's when most of the objectives of the Second Lebanese War were of course achieved. And again, as someone like yourself who participated in Operation Defensive Shield, the Second Intifada, of course, in reserves in Second Lebanon and in Protective Edge. Again, being, in terms of boots on the ground, being one of those boots on the ground down there by Gaza, seeing what things are. So I said, I'm not in, I'm not in the coalition or the government or know exactly what the objectives were. I would like to believe if that's what they said, that's true. It's just, I'm just wondering what those objectives were. Because again, as someone who's been there on the ground, I would think in order to do a lot of the things that at least I would want to do if I was the one setting the objectives. And again, of course, for a lot of national security reasons, you don't release what all of the military objectives are. But I'm saying the stuff that I would like to do, it's to me, it's difficult to see that only be done by air. And like you said, I think the Second Lebanese War is a great example where, many weeks we were only doing air stuff, and it was actually in the few days that we had ground forces were able to do a lot. And I would say it's a similar situation if you look at the beginning of Protective Edge versus being able to take out the terror tunnels, which again, you just need boots on the ground in order to be able to accomplish that type of mission. I would argue also, when Barak in the Second Intifada was trying different things through the air, it was the boots on the ground in defensive shield, particularly in Jenin, that was able to take down that terrorist infrastructure.
Right. But with saying all that, I again, whether it's true or not, or a spin, maybe I don't know, but we all know that the official story that's been put out there is that Israel called up all the ground troops to the Gaza border and then made an announcement that ground troops were being sent in, and that in a sense set up a trap that had Hamas send all their elite units to the border, and then we bombed the living daylights out of them, and we really decimated their elite forces. So whether that was all an elite plan, diversion plan.
So I'll tell you what I can tell you about that, right? I guess first of all, in terms of my unit, my brigade, they were literally called up, and again, my unit's not just a regular unit. One of the platoons in full, and the other two platoons, is there's three platoons in a brigade, especially the platoon that's supposed to go out first. So they were all out, sitting there on the Gaza border. And I have other friends in other units. They were actually mobilized. My son was there on the border. There were a lot of people who were brought in for reserve duty. And again, these are people who they're ground forces. They're not people that operate elsewhere. I'll tell you, as someone, I know you do a lot of Hasbara work yourself. I spend time also going ahead and representing the Israeli perspective on a lot of foreign media stations, particularly in a Chinese TV appearance. They were attacking me on this aspect, because they were basically saying that we said that we were going in, right? Whereas at least the way they're portraying it, and again, I'm being careful to only do things here that were revealed here in public, but that there was live fire coming from ground forces just from our side of the border. Right. Okay. So again, what we were saying was technically accurate, but the way it was being portrayed and the messaging that was coming out from the IDF spokesman was obviously something that was a little bit different. And they made a strategic decision afterwards. China, which of course ended up being very critical of us throughout the war following that, but also a lot of other international media stations, that they were just going to stop taking things coming from the IDF, because they felt like they were used as a tool in order to take out, of course, all these bad guys, all these Hamas terrorists, who relied on the fact that why would we go ahead and lie to the public, especially the international media, in the middle of a Hasbara, offensive, as well as, the actual offensive. So I can say, just in terms of the results, right, there was a price for whatever it is that we did do. And of course, all the stuff that we did here coming out from our side, of course, is that it was well worth the price in terms of the damage that Hamas sustained as a result of that. Again, whether it makes sense or doesn't make sense to do those type of things, when again, you're not just looking at the military, you have to be looking also at the diplomatic side of things. Both foreign relations with countries, but also, of course, the fight in Hasbara, the fight within the various international media stations, which of course, there are thousands at any given time that are, throughout Israel covering what's going on here. There's a lot of calculations. And once again, when you're not in the government and you're just relying on what your friends in the government are telling you, when you're no longer in that room, So whatever you do here, you also have to go ahead and put a little asterisk next to that.
Right. No, I'm very glad you raised that point, especially the point, and I was involved in this when it was happening because of my efforts with international media and social media, seeing the immediate backlash of saying we're never going to trust anything from the IDF again. And it makes me cry. Cry not out of anger, cry out of ultimate sadness of hypocrisy and immorality of these highfalutin journalists and media corporations. Because at the same time, these journalists and media companies are actually allowing themselves to be used as propaganda arms, putting out the lies of Hamas, because they know if they don't put out the lies of Hamas, they will be kicked out of Gaza, or their journalists will be kidnapped or maybe even killed. And their buildings are being used to fire rockets. They are literally being used not only as propaganda, but as human shields for some of the worst Muslim terrorists in the world. And yet they have no morals. They're upset at us because we're trying to do our best to destroy the enemy, while the media and the heads of these media companies are allowing themselves to be propaganda tools of terrorism. And listen, I'm going to take advantage. I'm going to say this right now because I'm about to start a campaign. I'm in the process of making this movie. I want there to be a campaign for that all of the media companies that had offices in that building with Hamas, AP, Al Jazeera, I don't know who else, to be called out for war crimes. We know they knew that they were in a building with Hamas. We know it. We have footage from 2009 where they know, oh, rockets are being shot from below this building. We know it. We need a public campaign to put them up for war crimes for allowing themselves to be used as human shields. They're not even, you can't blame, you can't say, oh, they were being used. No. They knew it. They knew it. They could have left. They could have gotten an office in another
Look,
building.
it was also reported that Israel gave, as you called, smoking gun, evidence to the Biden administration, and they backed us on that. Meaning, when the truth is on your side, as of course it is generally. Of course, we make mistakes. Everyone does, but generally, Israel does not make too many mistakes, and the truth is on our side. It takes time, unfortunately, but after the fact, we're able to go ahead and prove everything it is that we need to prove. I think that the point you're making is important, because whenever I go ahead and I explain this, I always say, well, you're a democracy. We hold you to a whole higher standard. We go ahead and we're in a situation where they put us up on a pedestal, and they pretty much say, listen, we know Hamas is a bunch of goons, and that's just the price for doing business in that area. And when we're in Afghanistan or Iraq or in some far out place in Africa, we're making the same deals that we do with Hamas when we're in Gaza. Meaning, from their perspective, they're saying, as a journalist, that's just the way they view journalism, how they're supposed to be doing it. And us, as the Western power, we are supposed to hold different rules, and there's a different regard compared to what we do compared to what they are doing. And again, that's great if you're looking at things in abstract or as some sort of theory or model within a classroom, or if you're sitting up in the ivory tower. When you're talking about Israeli lives that are at risk, when you're talking about Israeli citizens who are dying, that type of stuff goes into the calculations when it comes to how much weight do you want to give. I think I saw this meme of, I think it was Golda Meir, of the famous quote that she said of, I'd rather be pitied, I'd rather, be right and not dead than, be pitied and dead, or something to that effect. I don't remember. I'm paraphrasing what it is that was in that meme. But we're in a situation where, there is no clean way to do things. Okay. They specifically choose to do, this in the most messy way possible. And I've said this in all of my appearances. I'm sure you have too. The minute that Hamas goes ahead and chooses, to put hospitals, schools, apartment buildings, the media, building, which you mentioned, which is of course different than the thing we talked about before initially, which was the whole metro terror tunnel operation that they were running. But I'm saying, like, you have situations where they're choosing specifically places where there will be collateral damage, where there will be a situation where when you need to deal with the fact where on one side you have a ticking bomb, on the other side you have this issue of collateral damage that you have to make that tough decision. Do you want to see people die here or people die there? And when it comes down to whether it's the best Hasbara thing to say or not, when it comes to dead Israeli citizens who are your own citizens versus dead civilians on the side that's shooting at you, again, there are for sure innocents on both sides, but you're always going to choose to protect your citizens because that's your job. When you are a soldier and you're wearing the uniform of the country that sent you, you're there to protect your children back at home, just as I and you and every other Israeli soldier knows, compared to the situation that we see in Hamas, where of course they decide to go ahead and put their kids as human shields in order to protect themselves, which is a complete just ridiculous concept, which until now I've not found one person in any debate that I've been with, any Palestinian or pro-Palestinian, that can explain to me why it is that that's a moral thing.
And it's interesting because you bring up a very important point, which calls out the media as evil. And you say, because you brought up the point how the media companies basically make a deal with the devil. They know, well, in order for us to be in Gaza and report from Gaza, we have to go according to the rules that Hamas enforces upon us. We can't report this. We can't say this. We have to say this in order for us to stay and do our job. So basically, they made a deal with the devil where they know they're not reporting the truth. They're reporting information that allows the devil to allow them to report. So they're not even doing their duty as journalists. And not only are they not doing their duty as journalists, but by them covering and making Israel out to be the bad guy and innocent civilians who were used as human shields by Hamas being killed, well, they are enabling Hamas to kill even more human shields, even more innocent civilians. So the media is directly responsible for the deaths of innocent civilians because they're basically going against their moral responsibility.
They call it journalistic ethics. That's a term.
So, Jeremy, I'm calling upon you to help run a campaign to put these media companies on for war crimes.
I'll tell you, though, also what's interesting, because we were talking about the ones that are there on the ground in Gaza. There are a lot of these TV anchors that I go up against, that you go up, that everyone else who's in the Hasbara war does. These TV anchors who are sitting in London, in New York, in Washington, in France, in Paris or whatever. There's no price for doing business there. Okay, if you are in the safety of a Western capital in Western Europe or Northern America.
Sorry, say that again. I had noise. When you're in the safety, say that sentence again.
Sure, I said when you're in the safety of a Western European capital or a Northern American city, a lot of the excuses that we're talking about, again, whether you agree with us that that's not a reason to go ahead and lie and to sell those lies as truth, or you agree with the way that these journalists decide to conduct business. I'm saying that type of perspective is not even something that a lot of these anchors within these Western cities can use as an argument, because when they're selling those lies, that's already straight up propaganda. There is no price, that they have to pay, because they're able to then go back home to their very nice, comfortable apartment or condo or wherever it is that they live within these places, as opposed to the people, of course, living in Gaza, who then those journalists need to go and leave that building and go to another building in which they're living probably with the same people they're working in a few buildings over.
Right. All right. Okay. So let's delve into politics now. Now that we spent 20 minutes going into the outcome of the war, what is going on, Jeremy? What are we witnessing?
Well, since we've had the election, we had the race to the president's residence that resulted in the first mandate, which Netanyahu got. He failed. That led to a second round in the president's residence, which led to Lapid getting the mandate. And next week, on June 2nd, time is up. So you have a few scenarios that can come as a result of this. Scenario number one is that Lapid is able to form a government. He's able to say, listen, guys, I have a government. Then he has 7 days to be able to bring that to a vote. And then we either see if he indeed has what he says he has, or the vote fails. The second option is that Lapid says, I've not been able to form a government. And if he's not able to form a government, there are two different things that are happening here. One is Lapid is circulating a bill, which was sponsored by the Meretz Party, that will call to have new elections before, on the day that Lapid ends his mandate. This is similar to what Bibi did in the first round of elections, if you remember, to prevent Gantz from getting the mandate. The idea here is for Lapid to prevent the possibility of a third mandate. The second thing that could happen is, again, within the second scenario, if Lapid is not able to present a government, which is that we go into the 21 days, which takes us to the third mandate scenario. So again, briefly, either by June 2nd next week, Lapid presents a government, or he says he doesn't have a government. If he presents a government, he has a week to bring a vote. Either it'll happen or it won't happen in terms of getting enough Knesset approval. And that's a question mark, of course. And then the second thing is, if he's not able to do it, he's either successful in getting a majority in order to prevent the third mandate, or he's not able to, and then we end up going into the track of a third mandate. So you can tell me from there, which again, there are two different options, and really it's a checkerboard, since each one of those two options has, two of its own options, where it is that you would like me to first spend time going more into detail.
Let me take a step back.
But it's going to be one of those four things.
All right, so let me take a step back and come from a different angle. Before Hamas started firing rockets at Israel, the Israeli public was given the picture, again, whether it's true or not, we were given the picture that any second Lapid would have a government with Bennett, your party, Yamina party, and Sar, Tikva Chadasha, together with the whole left, Meretz, Avodah, Blue and White, as well as the Arab parties. The war started, and with the war starting, two things happened. One, the head of the Ram party said, I'm not talking politics. And again, to bring people into perspective, many Israeli Arabs took part in the violent riots in Israel. And everyone was saying, wait a second, there is no way we can have a government that relies on the Arab parties, because here they're standing by these Arab Israelis who are rioting against their own Jewish neighbors that they live peacefully next to for all these years. And the second thing was that Bennett himself said, that's it. There's no more Lapid option on the table. It's over. At least that was a message that was put out there. Now the war is over. What has changed since before the war? Or because it looks like we're back to square one with Lapid, as if any minute we can have this government with Yamina, Bennett, Sar, Tikva Chadasha, the left, and the Arab parties.
All right, so we'll back up to the second mandate. In terms of what happened in the second mandate, by law, Netanyahu cannot get the first because he had the first mandate, he can't get the second mandate. There was a question who it was that was going to be able to get the second mandate. There was the option that Bennett could get it, or the option that Lapid could get it. We talked, originally, there were three candidates, and Bibi got the most, so he got it first. There was what it seemed to be was there seemed to be a good chance that the Likud, along with the 52 bloc under Netanyahu, would all nominate Bennett, so that Bennett would have the mandate. And then what Bennett would be able to do is he would be able to negotiate both with the Bibi side and the Lapid side, and that way Netanyahu would know that the risk of only things happening with the Lapid side is out of question. This comes from the fact that the only one who has the legal authority to be able to form a coalition is the person with the mandate. Meaning, even if Netanyahu now finds 61 people to support his government, there's nothing he can do about it, because Lapid is the only one that can form it. if Bennett had the mandate, that would still allow Netanyahu, within the period of the second mandate, to have an opportunity for a right-wing coalition. What ended up happening in the president's residence in the end is that the 52 bloc decided to choose nobody. They decided not to nominate any candidate. That ensured that Lapid would be able to get the mandate. This also happened because Gideon Sa'ar, who had not backed Lapid, of course, he didn't back Netanyahu either, but he did not back Lapid in the first round in the president's residence, decided to move over and support Lapid in the second round. So what happens is Lapid gets the mandate instead of Bennett. And as we said, whoever has the mandate, we're happy to sit with. I pointed out back when Netanyahu had the mandate, Bennett had 5 meetings with him. Meetings, some of them going all night, some of them in the prime minister's residence, there on Balfour Street. Some of them where, again, Bennett brought his, 2 top advisors, Netanyahu brought his, and they tried to work on various scenarios to be able to form a government. In the end, what it came down to was Netanyahu had 3 shots at forming a government. One was convincing Smotrich to be able to sit with Abbas. The second was for Gideon Sa'ar to agree, based on whatever condition. There was the idea of if there's a rotation government and Bennett is first in the rotation, then maybe Gideon Sa'ar would come. That was an offer that was later made. And then the third option is that there could be defectors from other parties within the Lapid bloc that would then go ahead and move over. It was very clear that it was Bibi's job to try to deal with Smotrich. And he, pretty much said, Bennett, it's on you to deal with Sa'ar. And in terms of finding defectors, you have specific people in the Likud who are good at finding them. And, they were supposed to go ahead and do that. What ended up happening was, and I'm sure you've noticed this, there was zero pressure at all from Netanyahu on Smotrich to go with Abbas. There was a lot of effort and a lot of meetings between Bennett and Sa'ar. Sa'ar just said, for him, Netanyahu cannot be part of the next, government in a rotation, whether it's 1 people, 2 or 5 people in the rotation. He doesn't want Netanyahu to have one more day in the prime minister's chair. That's his position. And Netanyahu was in a situation, and of course it's his right to do so, to say, if I'm not prime minister, then no one's going to be prime minister. We said that, as the party that said we're going to do everything we can to form a government, that wasn't an acceptable position. Of course, the defectors route did not produce any results. And I never expected that to, but there was a lot of hope that a lot of people had on that specific route. And that led to a breakdown in the talks between Netanyahu and Bennett. And then, like I said, Netanyahu even refused to give Bennett the nominations in the president's residence. So when Lapid said, I have the mandate, you said that you would sit with whoever has the mandate. I have the mandate. Come sit with me. Bennett sat with him. And Lapid brought Bennett along with him to meet with the other members of the Lapid bloc. And they talked about the various ways that, again, under this situation, Bennett would be the one who would be sworn in as prime minister. Again, the idea would be a rotation government, but we can ask Benny Gantz exactly how that works in terms of having a long-term arrangement, especially with a fragile coalition. But yeah, so Bennett would be prime minister. How do you create a situation in which you would have a right-wing majority when you have a lot of left-wing MKs that would be in that type of coalition? How it would be that you would be able to, live up to your principles and values that you talked about during the election when you have all of these questionable parties as part of the coalition. So they sat and they had a lot of different discussions on that. What ended up happening was we got to a situation where it was the eve of Jerusalem Day, right? It was Sunday of that week, the day before things broke out on Monday on Jerusalem Day, where it seemed
That's
like we were
just
about
to remind everyone, Monday, Jerusalem Day was the day that Hamas started shooting rockets on us. It's the day before Hamas started shooting rockets.
Right. So it seemed that we were, I would say, about 3 days from a vote in which Naftali Bennett would be sworn in as the prime minister of the state of Israel. Again, there was nothing in writing. There were no coalition agreements, but it seemed like that was the direction and that was the way that things were going to go. And then we saw what happened. Hamas shot rockets. We ended up seeing a lot of violence in the streets, in the mixed cities, in Lod, in Akko, in Haifa, in a lot of other places. And you mentioned also, Mansour Abbas, but also Bennett said, I'm not going to be dealing with politics when Israel is under fire. And, just as I did a lot of Hasbara, and you did too, Naftali did probably more Hasbara interviews than anybody. I think he did
Yeah.
about 12 to 15 different interviews. Some of them, got posted on social media, others not, but he went out and did a very, very big service to the state of Israel. And this was a fundamental difference that he had with Lapid. Lapid continued with coalition negotiations while we were under fire. He didn't have an issue, Lapid, criticizing Netanyahu during this time. And that's something that Bennett, had an issue with. He did not criticize Netanyahu in any of the interviews that he did. And he didn't, criticize Gantz or the Israeli policy. He gave full backing. And I think also, I would say that is what I think the Israeli people expect. It doesn't matter if the government is right or left or who is there. You want to know that the entire Israeli Knesset and all Israeli parties are getting together and supporting the government when there are rockets falling on your cities and there's violence on your streets. So I think that was the responsible position to take. We get to the point where people are asking, well, why isn't Bennett making a statement, this, that, whatever? He didn't make, statements because he was very clear. He's not going to make statements of a political nature when we're under fire, and even if he would write in a internal group, I'm not going to talk about political stuff till after things are over. We would see, unfortunately, things would get leaked, and that stuff would get out, and so on and so forth. But nothing has fundamentally changed in terms of the principle of us wanting to go ahead and prevent another election. You've seen all the polls. There's no difference in the blocks. We'll go to a fifth election, we'll go to a sixth election, a seventh election, an eighth election. It doesn't look like people are going to change their minds. Within the blocks, you might have some changes, as each poll will tell you in one way or another, but the blocks themselves are not really changing. We're not going to see a resolution if we go to another election. It would be a different thing if we did, but it doesn't look like that's the direction we're looking at least, again, according to the polls. So, Netanyahu offered to Bennett, again, even though Lapid has the mandate, to come back and to do negotiations with the Likud. And like I said, our goal is to go ahead and prevent an election. So we said, sure. So we went ahead and we started with negotiations with the Likud. Lapid, in the meantime, has gone around and signed coalition deals with other parties. What it appears his strategy is, again, looking at the way that he's doing things, is that he plans to go next week at the end of the mandate to Bennett and say, here is the coalition. I decided to go on without you. This is what it looks like. And I expect you now to agree to this. That's what it would seem.
Or
I would
else,
assume
or else,
what,
election
or
bill.
or else, yeah, I'll go ahead with the election bill because I had mentioned you have the possibility of a third mandate. What happens in the event of a third mandate? I would assume, right? Okay, if Lapid just had 28 days to form a government and he didn't manage, he's not going to get the signatures for a third mandate. I think if Bibi was not able to get anything in the first mandate, and even during Lapid's second mandate wasn't able to achieve 61, he would not be able to do so. Bennett is in this unique position where, again, he's the only one that's not being ruled out by either side, and both sides need him in order to form a government. And as pointed out, even Lapid, who's signing these coalition deals, is keeping in mind that his plan is to offer to offer Bennett the premiership at the end of this process because he doesn't have the votes without it. And on the other side of it, Netanyahu himself understands the only chance we get Gideon Sa'ar to come over, or Benny Gantz, or whatever maybe potential rebels, or refugees that might leave in the case it's not Netanyahu, right? If it's Bennett. So even Netanyahu again was talking publicly about the idea of Bennett being prime minister. So it makes sense that people from both the right and the left camp would possibly go ahead and into a third mandate in which they would sign signatures for Bennett. It's possible they wouldn't because, again, you're in a situation where you're in both sides and you wouldn't necessarily know which direction he would go in. For Lapid, it's more of a scary endeavor because Bennett has said many times publicly he prefers a right-wing coalition to a left-wing coalition. So if he does go ahead and get the third mandate, again in this theoretical situation, one would assume that he would first reach out to Netanyahu before reaching out to Lapid. On the other hand, if Lapid is trying to say that he's doing everything to prevent another election, it'll look really bad if he doesn't sign for Bennett. But if he goes ahead and while he has the mandate, does a dispersing of the Knesset, and of course he doesn't say it's about Bennett, he says it's about Netanyahu or whatever other talking point he decides to go into. Again, within these theoretical scenarios, so it would help him escape a lot of those potential scenarios that again could produce a government, but not necessarily one that he would like as well. And again, you can just go back and ask Netanyahu why he didn't choose Bennett during this time to have the mandate, because this is again the ramifications, and really this this entire series of 4 elections in 2 years is a series of Netanyahu making miscalculations in terms of decisions that have led him down a path that is not necessarily the best thing for him. Certainly not for the right-wing camp, I would argue. So to summarize that long point, what you could have is a situation where we do go back to where we were 3 days before Jerusalem Day, but that's not the place we are in now. That could be the place we're in tomorrow. It could be the place we're in next week. But right now, in terms of what's happening, we have not seen a return to that situation.
Wait, what are you referring to? Because in my head, when I think about the situation before the Gaza war, before Jerusalem Day, it was Lapid and Bennett in very intense talks together to set up the coalition. Whereas right now, it's, as you explained, it's Lapid setting up his own coalition agreements, and then basically at the end of the 99th minute, then going to Bennett. All right, are you on board? Meaning, is the situation worse now for Bennett, Yamina, and the right wing camp, because it's basically Lapid now in charge of all these coalition agreements putting together?
So it would depend again on what happens there. Meaning, Bennett could go ahead and say, "I'm very happy about all the coalition agreements that you signed. But if you want me to be prime minister, we're going to return to where we were, and we're going to rip up everything you just did and go back to the stuff we were talking about before."
Got it.
And by the way, Lapid could say no. The parties that signed the coalition agreements could say no, and we could go to another election. Again, these are all theoretical situations and scenarios, and we don't know what's happening. We're doing the game of playing each one of these out. But I'm saying each person has their interests. Right. Lapid's interest is to form a government and get rid of Netanyahu. That's his interest. Bennett's interest is to form a government, but his preference is for it to be a right-wing government. If he did have the mandate, by the way, I do believe, even, what you were talking about beforehand about the need of, the Arab parties or whatever, I do believe the Haredim, who do like being in coalition governments, and again, I've talked with many of them or whatever, and this might have been Netanyahu's calculation, by the way, we saw some of the MKs in the Haredi parties writing, public letters to Bibi, to let someone else, do the job. It's possible if Bennett got the mandate, you would have some sort of mix mash in which you'd have the Haredim come in, and then you wouldn't need Abbas. If both Shas and UTJ come in, then you don't even need Meretz either. If you're able to bring in Smotrich, then you don't even need the Labor Party, meaning there's a certain amount in terms of math in the way to 61. Depending on how things went, there was possibilities in which there would be a much, much more right-wing version. Going back to, the argument of people were like, well, why would, Lapid not give, Bennett the mandate if he wants to make him prime minister or whatever? Again, from Lapid's perspective, Bennett would still negotiate as he's negotiating now with the Likud because he wants to have a right-wing government. And if there would be a pathway to 61, so Bennett would take it. It's just there isn't one that seems feasible right now. It's possible between now and next week, Sar changes his mind, or you do have those defectors, or I don't know, Mansour Abbas decides to convert to Judaism and Smotrich gives him a hug. Like there are a lot of potential things that can happen. It's just it doesn't seem that a lot of these things are likely. But you have a situation where what Lapid has wanted to do is create a coalition which Bennett would be the most right wing in it, compared to Bennett, who would have wanted to create a coalition where Lapid would have been the most left wing member of it. Where again, the core people within these coalitions, everyone understood, is Bennett and Saar and Gantz and Lapid. Like in terms of the majority of MKs in the coalition, we knew who it was. It's a question: do you go in the direction of Lieberman and Labor and Meretz and possibly the Arabs, or do you go in the direction of the Haredim, Smotrich, perhaps some sort of splinter party coming out of the Likud from the more liberal side that are old pals with Gidon Saar, for instance? There were various things that were possible, but with Lapid having the mandate, and again, I do think that was a mistake from Netanyahu's perspective, and we saw that especially during this war, that we might end up in a situation from his perspective, right, where we'll end up with the government anyways, but we'll be in a government in which it might end up being pulled more to the left had Netanyahu given that mandate to Bennett, and then we would have maybe seen even a coalition where Netanyahu would be able to be prime minister within rotation.
So what's bothering me, and I think bothering a lot of people, let's put aside the Yamina party for a second, because I want to ask you what the feeling is of the shetach, of the field of the Yamina voters, supporters, activists, in terms of the potential of Yamina joining a left-wing government. And again, for people to understand, a left-wing government under whether it's Bennett as prime minister or Lapid or whatever, but with it's the Arab parties, the Meretz parties, you're having ministers and committee members running these committees. Some of them, if not many of them, if not half of them, very important, led by people who are against the existence of the state of Israel as a Jewish state and all that entails, which is so dangerous on so many levels. But what I want to ask you right now, what bothers me is, up until now, you look at the media and even the activists, it's Bennett and Yamina getting all of the fire, getting all of the anger about allowing this to happen. Very little attention is being given to the fact that Bennett's been open to sitting with Likud, even under Bibi, and coming up with solutions to make a right-wing government. The one who's been adamantly against it has been Saar and his New Hope Tikva Chadasha party. And the thing that really bothers me is understanding the difference between a right-wing government and a left-wing government. And Saar understands the fact that Meshilut, the rule of law in Israel is very, very fragile, because with each day the Supreme Court and the justice system usurp more and more powers from the legislative. Just this week, they now came up with a ruling that basically negates even basic laws, that they can annul and change all basic laws, which until now was sacrosanct, even according to the Supreme Court. And this upcoming government potentially can be appointing, I think, 4 or 6 Supreme Court justices that in a sense will either take Israel further down the autocratic justice system rule of Israel, or try to bring about changes through appointments to the justice system and through the Supreme Court to allow for changes to rebalance Israeli democracy between the different branches. And yet Saar, who understands this very well, he's a lawyer, he benched at the Supreme Court, he has been vocal about the problems with the Supreme Court and the justice system. He, in a sense, is allowing this to allowing what is the worst of the worst of the worst potential situation to happen by being so anti any potential solution with Benjamin Netanyahu leading the Likud party. So that's what bothers me. And others? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the Gidon stuff, and then I'll move backwards. And this is one of the things that I don't think people get. If we do go in that direction, again, I said we're just not, because the talks right now are with Likud, they're not with Yesh Atid. What was talked about was that the stuff that are important to the right would stay in the right, and the justice ministry would be in the right, meaning if you look at the disagreements as reported in the press, it was, is Gidon Sar, who you're talking about, the new justice minister, or is it Ayelet Shaked? Okay,
I mean, you're
like
talking if you're talking even with
I'm
Lapid
talking
having the
about
mandate.
I'm talking about in what was talked about with the potential Bennett government, in which again Lapid would be the foreign minister in that government. We would have a situation in which the justice ministry would be in the hands of the right. And again, the question in terms of the identity of the right wing minister, who would, as you pointed out, not four but six, there'd be six appointments of Supreme Court justices.
Justice.
And it's important to say this: it's a 15. It isn't nine like it is in the United States. It's 15, judges on the bench, but six is a lot. And if you look at the fact that Shaked already appointed six, she would be the next one, and she appointed another six. Well, I don't have to tell you, we would have a very different Supreme Court than the Hauser Compromise court case, which we could spend an hour just talking about what happened
Right.
with that one. But the point I was trying to say is this: if you look at the important ministries and you look at the government that potentially was going to be formed, I'm not talking about the stuff that's being signed now with Lapid, with all these different people. It would be, and I know I'll have to say this twice because I know this needs to sink in with some people. It would be more right wing than the current Netanyahu-Gantz government. I'll say that one more time. The Bennett Lapid government would be more right wing than the Netanyahu Gantz government.
Okay, break that down. Explain that to people. Why? Because just saying that, people won't believe. Why?
No,
Explain.
I understand that, And again, it's difficult because now stuff that was said, but it was never put down and signed upon as agreements. It's difficult, but I can tell you that all of the stuff that mattered to the right, you'd have right wing ministers. But I'm saying if you just want to take that one thing, that juicy thing that we're talking about in terms of ministries of the justice ministry, right now Benny Gantz is the justice minister. Okay, before
Right.
him for this entire term, it was Avi Nissenkorn who
Even worse.
was. And I don't have to remind you the time in which Tzipi Livni was the justice minister under Netanyahu, and she was also in charge of the negotiations with the Palestinians.
Right. And again, I'm just going to explain to people who might not be as familiar what you are alluding to is that even with right-wing Netanyahu-led governments, he has consistently, except when, in a sense, blackmailed by Bennett and Shaked, consistently given the justice ministry, in addition to other important ministries and policy making that are important to the right, handed over to the responsibility of the left in order for them to be part of his coalition government. So even though we had right-wing governments, many of the policy making and ministries that we needed to be under the right, Netanyahu did not keep in the right. He gave to the left.
Sure, and those are important things to know. The left would get ministries under the deals we were talking about, but it also doesn't bother me for them to have it. Meaning, I think the Israeli health system, whichever knows, is very much socialist with private options, but very much socialist, works better because of the fact that you have four different public providers, and each one of the four has three different levels that you can pay into, each one being obviously more expensive than the next. But essentially, you have 12 public options to choose from at three different price ranges from four different companies. So even though it's a socialist system, there is a lot of competition, and having a left-wing health minister is not the same as having a left-wing education minister. Okay, and also, I'll say I don't know about your own, feelings on these things, but giving the environment ministry to Meretz does not, bother me. I think, whatever your position is on climate change, there are, certain things that we need to do to adapt to it, whether it's, stuff that is, being done by men, or it's, for whatever other reason, there are things we need to do when it comes to these issues. So these are not things that are going to bother me. And of course, in a majority of the Netanyahu governments anyways, this is what was happening. I think people forget this, but the Labor Party right now is a member of the government right now, having the economy ministry, the social labor and welfare ministry, um, of course, blue and white, as I said, including the more left wing flank of it, has, practically half of the government ministries at this point because of the deal that they had struck with Netanyahu. So you would see a situation where you would see an improvement in terms of the deal that Netanyahu made, where he gave a majority of the ministries that mattered to the Gantz side, to the left side of the bloc, right? You would have the other type of situation where the stuff that mattered to the right would stay with Bennett, whereas the Lapid side of the bloc would end up getting the type of ministries that we see, Netanyahu getting now, which includes stuff like the Ministry for Regional Cooperation, or, like I said, the environment, stuff like agriculture. And again, I'm not saying that these things aren't important. I'm saying whether it's a left wing or a right wing minister, when it comes to health or agriculture, or a lot of these other aspects, I don't think you would see a very significant sort of difference in terms of what would happen, as opposed to the situation of having right wing education, justice, those type of ministries. Those are type of things which have a real ideological flair to them, and therefore would be able to really change the way that things would be going forward. So that's why I said I needed to say it twice. That's also why I said I needed to sort of clarify this point. I don't think
Right.
people fully understand the power that a minister has within his ministry, but also by just appointing someone that sends the spirit of the message of what the government is trying to say and do in that area, it trickles all the way down to the common worker within that ministry. So I really, really think that it'll be very interesting, right? But if we do see some sort of return to that type of thing, to measure it up against this government and also previous governments, again, whether it was with the Ehud Barak or Tzipi Livni or whoever else, because it's okay to be critical of this point, but you can't be hypocritical. Meaning, if Bennett, who I assume most people would believe is more right wing than Bibi, and in most of the key ideological positions in terms of ministries, we have right wing ministers
Right.
that, in terms of policy and important things that are coming up on the calendar, such as appointing 6 Supreme Court justices, we would have a lot to be able to offer the right. The other point that you were making, in terms of why all the pressure is on Yamina, this is my own personal feeling, but my own personal feeling is that from the beginning, Bibi was not very serious about forming a government. And if he was, it wouldn't be Bennett that he put all of his pressure on. Because again, time and time again, we said, we're working with you. And even now, we're in talks with the Likud. We're not the problem. Smotrich refuses to sit with any Arab parties. And that's fine. Believe me, I completely understand that position. And it's a legitimate position. Netanyahu did not once publicly or privately, put any pressure on Smotrich to change that position. Publicly he said, we need to bring in Mansour Abbas. We need to bring in the Ram party. He had no problem, taking pictures with him or making deals with him. Also throughout this process of the various things with the arrangement committee and different votes over the last couple months. But he never put any pressure on Smotrich at all. The second thing is that Gideon Sar, as you said, we said, under fire, we're not, dealing with politics. Gideon Sar said during that time he was still going with Lapid and didn't have a problem continuing with coalition negotiations. During that entire time period, and even right now, there is zero in terms of pressure coming out from Netanyahu himself or the Likud to Gideon Sar to come in. Again, the pressure's on Bennett. Why is the pressure on Bennett? Because again, if you really want to go ahead and form this 61, you need Sar. Pressuring Bennett doesn't help you because those are the seats you already have to count on in order to go ahead and have the coalition you want.
Right.
Um, just to finish this point, I think, and I get this, that Netanyahu doesn't want to do it. But if Netanyahu would step aside, we would have a very strong right wing Knesset. We already have one of the strongest right wing Knessets, if not the most right wing Knesset of all time. We'd have a very strong right wing government. And again, this idea of Bennett and his ego and his personal ambition, Bennett has said this many times publicly. And I'll tell you this also. If Netanyahu wanted to give it to number two, which is Yuli Edelstein, or number three, Israel Katz, or any of those other people, I don't see Gidon Sar, I don't see us, I don't see anyone else complaining.
Did I lose you, Jeremy?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can hear you. You're
said,
just saying you don't see anyone complaining.
Yeah. Where I didn't see anyone complaining about what?
Oh, if Netanyahu would give it to Yuli Edelstein or Israel Katz,
yeah. So we have an ability to have a right wing government in this Knesset. Netanyahu could have decided to go for the presidency. He would have been supported. He would still have had a very big role. Again, we're not the ones that are telling Netanyahu to leave. I'm just saying in terms of the options that we have now, because people tell me, they're like, well, if in the current talks with Likud you're not able to get what you want, don't go back to Lapid. So I say, but that's going to lead us to another election. And they're like, well, that's better. I'm looking at what the alternatives are here, right? You have one alternative is that we see, again, we can't compromise on our values here, but can we create some sort of government that is more right wing than the current government with Lapid? If yes, to me, that's better than a fifth election. And I think also if Netanyahu can decide that he's willing to step down and let someone else lead the right, I think that would be great. And no one is stopping him from doing that. I understand that he doesn't want to, but to go ahead and say it's better to have a fifth election over the alternatives that I mentioned, I just don't see that being something that makes sense. Avi, we're the only country that did not pass a 2020 state budget. Yemen, in the middle of a civil war, was able to do it. Okay, in Syria, they're able to do it somehow every year. Of course, it's a dictatorship. It's pretty easy. In 2021, we are still the only ones that have not passed one. We just are, in many ways, a laughing stock. We had a war in which you're not even sure if, what would have happened if Lapid created a majority in the middle of the war and demanded a vote, okay, in the Knesset to replace the prime minister in the middle of that operation. We are in, this situation of constant instability, political flux. There are important challenges that we need to have answers to. We have situations like, I'm sure you followed the situation of, Itzik Sidan, right? The poor guy who's who the budgets to help people like him, they were all approved in the Knesset, 3 years ago. We just have not been able to pass a state budget and actually take those budget items and put the money in there to actually provide public services and help people and do what a government is supposed to be able to do. You know me, I'm a very ideological person, but my feeling here is the number one thing you need to have is a government. And I've said this many times over the last few years. I'm okay also losing an election. I'm okay sitting in the opposition. In fact, our party sat the last year plus in the opposition. But you know what? You need to have a government, and you need to not just have a government for the sake of having, a government and people who sit in chairs and make salaries. You need to do your job, and the most primary elementary job that you have when you are forming a new government in Israel is an ability to pass a state budget and make sure that each one of those ministries is able to actually do the things that they're supposed to, and that you're able to pay for those things, and that you don't go to parents and say, we don't have enough money. We're going to have to cut a bunch of hours, from school because we can't pay the teachers. okay, or have a situation where say, listen, we have corona and we have all of these people dying, but we don't have money for more beds. Even though again, we've approved all this stuff, but we're out of the emergency funds and we're out of this and that and whatever. And there's only so many times you can create tricks through the appropriations committee, to deliver, all of these different things. And especially now with this landmark ruling of the Supreme Court, which prevents us to do a lot of things by saying you can't play with basic laws the way that we've played with them up until now, it just makes that even more difficult in terms of being able to do our job without having a national budget. So again, I really hope we're able to do stuff. I really hope that we're able to have a right-wing government. I'm not very optimistic about it, but I really hope that we are able to have a government. And again, as someone who knows Naftali pretty well, as you know, I do believe that he's going to do everything possible in whatever arrangement that he'll be able to stand for the type of values and principles that all of us on the right wing stand for. I really, truly believe that.
So you're a betting man, Jeremy. Come June 2nd, are we going to have a Lapid-Bennett government, or are we going to fifth elections or a third mandate?
I don't know, because it depends on a lot of people. The situation is right now in the BB groups, they are sure that Bennett's going with Lapid. In the Lapid groups, they are sure that he's going with Bibi. Okay, in certain groups, everyone is
in the
sure.
Amina groups?
In the Amina groups, right now, there's obviously a disagreement. There's unfortunately been a lot of leaks there. But you have people who definitely would like to see some sort of arrangement with the Likud. You have some people who would like to see an arrangement with Lapid. You have a lot of people who want to see another election. But I would say, if you're asking me where the majority is, right, because people who leak, they always leak with a certain interest. I think a majority of the people, and this shouldn't surprise, it's surprise the spinsters, but people who voted Yamina when we said Naftali Bennett wants to be prime minister actually want to see Naftali Bennett be prime minister. Meaning they're saying, go be prime minister. If you're able to make a deal with Bibi and be prime minister, great. If you're able to make a deal with Lapid and be prime minister, great. But a majority of them, they support the leader of the party that they voted for, and they want to see him as prime minister. But this is the thing. As much as Lapid and as much as Netanyahu want to paint this entire situation that everything here is about Naftali Bennett, it's not. If Lapid offers a lousy deal and he's not willing to compromise and makes this calculation that he can now create this, left-wing government on full and expect Bennett to be some sort of fig leaf, as opposed to the type of things that were talked about beforehand, then in my opinion, Lapid is going to be disappointed and will go to another election. And Lapid can say as much as he wants that he'd blame, Bennett for it, but it would be Lapid who brought us there by deciding to go backwards in negotiation. I would say the same thing with Netanyahu. Again, Netanyahu doesn't need to step aside. But if Netanyahu doesn't want to step aside and he wants to do everything possible to sabotage the creation of an alternative government, which again, its goal is to be able to bring stability and pass national budgets in this nation, just to bring us to another election, that's not going to change anything. I would understand if he was getting 61 in the polls, but he's not. It's to send us to another election, to send us to the next one after that, and a continuous circle that brings us nowhere and continuously humiliates us as a nation and creates an even bigger and bigger hole in terms of our deficit, in terms of our ability to actually pay, for the things that we need to. And of course, the value of our currency, our credit rating, and all of these important things which are necessary to maintain the financial standing which we have today.
Well, all right. Well, listen, Jeremy, thank you once again for a comprehensive update of our crazy, crazy, crazy political situation. Just praying to witness, hopefully as soon as possible, a good government of Israel.
I told you, I really hope for a good government. At this point, I'll take not every government, but practically I really believe this at this point. Practically any government is better than continuing in this state the way we are now, because this is just cannot be the new normal. It just can't be.
The takeaway I get from you, and listen, you're my Knesset insider and man on the ground with an ear and a mouth to talking with Bennett. And the message I get from you is, if there is a Bennett Lapid government, it's going to be the one that you, Mr. Proud Jewish right-winger Israeli, is one that you could feel proud about being part of.
Yeah, I mean, look,
On a policy
again,
level.
this is difficult for people to get, but for someone to put their name on something, okay, means that they actually believe in it. People who don't believe in it, they resign, they leave, and I can also respect that. Meaning, I understand people who say that. Again, my question to everyone who says, if this is where we go, why should they tell me they don't want to go there? Ask them, A, what's their alternative? The answer to that is almost always another election, which again, to me, I just don't accept that as an alternative. It's legitimate that that's their opinion. I just don't think that's a good thing. Meaning they acknowledge there is no other, meaning if they know if Bennett can go with Bibi, he will. If that doesn't, Lapid is a Barat Mechdal, right? It's a situation where, it's either that or elections, and we're saying we would do it if it's better than another election. For people to say it's better go elections no matter what the scenario is. I'm saying if we're able to achieve a more right-wing government than the one we have now, so why is it better to go to a fifth election when it's going to crash our economy?
Right.
And then I would say B is ask people, what are you afraid of? What is it that makes you afraid of this Bennett Lapid government? And then when they tell me a lot of things, a lot of times it's based on stuff that, again, I don't know what the final thing is going to be, and I don't know if there will be something. But at least based on the type of talks that we're having a while ago, almost all the fears people are talking about, as you mentioned, like the 6 appointments of the Supreme Court justices and whatever, these are fears that are just not of substance, because we thought of those things. Naftali's a smart guy. I really like. I understand the Likud propaganda machine, but to make this out that Naftali Bennett is not an ideologue, when it was Naftali Bennett who was the ideological backbone of all of the Netanyahu governments, forcing Netanyahu to take an ideological stand on almost every single issue, I think they need to go ahead and give him a bit more credit here. And I think, again, they have to understand that, even with everything that's going on, Bennett has no problem sitting with Netanyahu. It's Netanyahu that is still, until today, refusing to put zero pressure on Smotrich or Sar to be able to move us in one of the two directions which are necessary in order to produce a government that he would be the head of.
No, I hear you. Jeremy, thank you very, very much for your insight. Very, very important. I appreciate your time.
Of course. Thank you, Avi.
Everybody, there you go. You have an update from Knesset Insider and insider to the Yamina Party and political consultants to Naftali Bennett of the Yamina Party, Jeremy Saltan. Hope you enjoyed catching up on the latest and where things stand today. And please share the video. And just before signing off and saying shalom from the eternal and ancestral homelands of the Jewish people, if you want to continue to receive our videos from the Pulse of Israel and receive the truth that is being censored by the media and censored by social media and censoring us, well, the best way to ensure continue receiving our videos, go to pulseofisrael.com and sign up for the newsletter. Shalom, everyone. Thanks for watching. Signing off from the eternal and ancestral homeland of the Jewish people, the land of Israel.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.